Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm pleased to introduce our first webinar of 2022, which will be with Jen Schadendorf presenting on GaYme Changers at Work, how the LGBT plus community and their allies are changing the global economy. So in a moment, I'm going to pass over to Jens, who's going to do his presentation. But before I do, I'd just like to let everyone know that today's session will be recorded and you will receive a copy of the presentation a week from today. Today's session will also feature some polls, which I'm going to launch in a moment, and they'll be available throughout the session. So we do encourage you to answer those polls, and obviously Jens will be able to discuss his findings later on during the session. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Jens to begin the session. Over to you, Jens.
Thank you so much, Paul, and hello, everybody, wherever you are. So it's an honor, of course, to go on with or start this session. So I have some problems here to go on with the Paul, can you help me?
I think it might be because I've got the poll open. Let me just close that. You should be able to try again now.
No.
If you click your mouse on the presentation.
Okay, wonderful.
There you go. Perfect.
Thank you. So thank you again for having me here at Amber. It's an honor as well to open this session for this year, and hello everybody around the world wherever you are. So today the title of the seminar or the webinar is this again: GaYme Changers at Work, how the LGBT+ community and their allies are changing the global economy. I think you have seen a bit about me as the presenter or the author of a book, which is the foundation of my presentation today. So the book title, as you see on the right-hand side, is GaYme Changers, which I think is a nice twist as well. The book has been published last spring. It has been quite an impact so far. I've got a lot of responses. The book was nominated for several awards as well. So a lot of impact. It's the first of its kind globally. But now I'll start. And let me share, for instance, so that's the first slide I'm showing here, what I'm talking about today. There are three parts, basically. The first part, I'm talking about what I call a stunning ecosystem, which has been evolved around LGBT equality at global workplaces. Then I will be talking about drivers and trends and fields of action. I think that's self-explaining. And then I'm going to number 3 and not number 4. There's a mistake. Sorry for that. To take action in the corporate setting and ensure LGBT+ equality at work. So that's my next slide here, and this gives you a shared sort of idea about how I worked through my book and how I got to the insights in my book and my presentation here. So I've been traveling around the world across 4 continents, have talked to many people, it's more than 100 in the US and Canada and all over Europe. So for instance, I've been as well in Seattle. There's this very global conference, which is called Workplace Summit of Out and Equal, one of the major organizations dealing with LGBT+ equality at work, which is very old, perhaps one of the oldest globally. It started already in the late 90s, and of course now has been very successful, and its sort of light tower or leading event is this global conference, which, as you may imagine, has been digital only and virtual only in 2020 and 21 because of the pandemic. But I've been there in Seattle. More than 5,000 people, and you see some impressions here of this research I've done there. And there's a huge numbers has been a huge numbers as well of sponsors, which of course gives you an impression how many companies are already engaged in this topic, at least in the US. Although of course the Workplace Summit is global, it has a certain of course, US bias to some extent. And this conference was very special as well because I mean it's 4 days, 5 days overall. You have a lot of seminars, workshops, you have keynotes, of course. But this was the first event when we saw as well a lot of Indians showing up because you may know, or perhaps may not know, in that September of the year 2018, India changed its laws and decriminalized same-sex in the law, which was an old colonial law, and opened up possibilities as well for companies, but also for foundations that are openly to address the topic of LGBT plus equality. And since India is such a large country, of course, this has a global impact as well. So give you another example to tell you something about this. Well, the European setting, there is, of course, other organizations like Stonewall in the UK, which is as well very old. There is Workplace Pride, which is a major organization, and which is based in the Netherlands, where more than 70 organizations as members. Stonewall has even more, and of course, out of nucleus even more because of the US and engagements there as well, vis-a-vis Latin America and China. Workplace Pride is very special in that sense because, you know, the Netherlands, of course, compared to the United Kingdom or, for instance, the US, is smaller. It's about 18 million inhabitants, but there's a lot of activities. Even the Workplace Pride webpage is only in English. The government is very active there, so there are several ministries, members of Workplace Pride, working for LGBT equality at the workplace, not just in the Netherlands, but far beyond. An example for this, of course, is a series of conferences that have been undertaken since they've been set up so some 10 years ago, approximately. So there was as well an event, for instance, they did together with the community business in Hong Kong. So I've been traveling to Hong Kong to attend this event. Also, I was in Amsterdam, as I was saying, with Workplace Pride, and in Seattle with Equal. So talk there. And of course, community business is special because, you know, Hong Kong is special, it belongs to mainland China. And at that time when I was there was a lot of activities led by community business, and there was the cooperation between Workplace Pride Foundation in the Netherlands, Accenture, where the event was hosted, and community business not just engaged in D&I matters in Hong Kong, but also in other parts of the region, for instance, in the Philippines and so forth, and India as well. So, but of course, just in brackets, since about 2 years, of course, the situation in Hong Kong has a bit changed, but still, there are many companies engaged in workplace equality, LGBT workplace equality in Hong Kong. I've been also traveling to Africa, to Johannesburg specifically, to see their launching the first LGBT plus equality index. And this gives you as well an indication what is going on around the world, especially during the last, let's say, 7 to 8 years. There was a kind of a momentum, which I'm describing in my book as well at length. So it started around 2013 and 14. Many organizations, so what I call the LGBT ecosystem around the world, sort of mushroomed from that time approximately on. And also, so South Africa was then showing up in that respect, and setting up a major business conference, the first of its on the continent of its kind. There was then an event, with workshops and discussion, but also they launched, as I said, the first equality index, LGBT plus equality index for the corporate world, which of course was a major thing and has a strong impact as well, and signaling, in fact, to the whole continent. So I'm going on. So this is also a major organization I wanted to briefly introduce to you, which is Open for Business, which has been set up also only 2015. So because I was talking about this sort of strong development starting basically in 2013 and 14, with many organizations have been set up globally, as I was saying, in South Africa, and also Open for Business 2015 is one of these organizations. And what they are focusing at, they're also they're focusing on researching basically the business case of LGBT plus equality and the economic case of LGBT plus equality. And of course, you know the difference of the two. So the business case is focusing more on the economic impact with respect to workplaces, mainly the business world, while the economic case of LGBT plus equality focuses on the impact on the whole economy. And of course, this is interlinked, that's clear. So they've started to do research. I'm getting back to this point a bit later. And I've been invited for a major thing they did in Brussels in 2018 when they were presenting a major study here on the role of the private sector in advancing LGBT across LGBT plus inclusion. But meanwhile, they have launched many other research studies. And for Open Business, it's a bit the same as for other organizations I've just mentioned. But perhaps even more for Open for Business relevant that they have a global appeal. They are based in the UK. They are run from the UK, but they have now, as far as a director in Kenya. They have a very strong hold in the US as well. The member companies that are giving money, when you're going to their website, Open for Business, I can recommend this to you. You see a lot of major companies from the consulting industry, such as BCG, McKinsey, Accenture, but there's also IBM and Virgin, for instance. So many. You will see this on their website, as I was saying. And so they're doing research, but they also do some things like rating cities globally on their being LGBT friendly or not. And usually they are launching then every year an index showing which city is the most friendly according to their criteria. And the last time it was Amsterdam who was the winner. And there is, as you may know as well, in the city world, now a kind of a competition as well, who is then perceived as the most LGBT friendly city, because this has become a very attractive factor as well for marketing the city, for attracting people to come there and during the Pride season, but not just only during the Pride season. So, and also this is not just limited to the corporate world as such. This has also reached another level around. I was talking about the year 2013 and 14. So because I'm describing a development, a very strong development, because in 2013, and this is very much connected to the Obama administration, mainly Hillary Clinton, who pushed this sort of change within the United Nations system. They launched a campaign which is called the Free and Equal campaign, which has the goal, and still running, a goal to teach people around the world and to address discrimination issues around LGBT equality. And also I can recommend to you, for those who are interested, to either reach out to me or to go to the website and to get some more information about that. What is very important here, and that's the reason why I've put in this chart here, you see they have now as well launched what is called the United Nations LGBTI Standards of Conduct for Businesses. And that's very new. It's very recent, was launched 2017, inspired by the Free and Equal campaign. And it's still run under the roof of the Free and Equal campaign. And that it allows companies to sign and to commit publicly as a LGBT friendly, and it's not just something which sort of limits the company to address LGBT equality in their company as such, but also go beyond. Address, for instance, the issue of LGBT friendliness in the customers' world, in the their supply chain, and the investors' world, etc., and also to encourage them to stand up for human rights. And that's a major thing which happened in 2017, and a lot more than 300 corporates has signed these standards. A lot more, approaching 400 now, and so that's of course something, as I said, started in 2013, Free and Equal campaign. Then these standards, which have this connection to the corporate world, a major achievement. Although of course it's a sort of a self-obligation they are doing there. I'm going on to show you another major thing. And you know, the World Economic Forum is like the high mass of the global elite. You know, there's a discussion around the World Economic Forum, whether or not they should have this important role they're playing now. Of course, they have been limited in impact because of COVID, because they also were forced to do their events digitally, virtually. But this is where the global leaders are meeting, and until 2013, there was nothing. So there was attempts to bring this topic of LGBT plus equality on the agenda in Davos, but there was no sort of successful attempt. But it was in 2014 when a major investor, Paul Singer, teamed with another investor and said, we have to change this. So Paul Singer has a gay son, and he said, so we have to change this and make this topic in the World Economic Forum, because it's about here, it's about representation, it's about rights, and it's about, of course, resources. So it makes again the connection to the business case and the economic case of LGBT equality. But of course, he also wanted to address this because of a human rights issue. And that's interesting because as you may recall, after the world financial crisis, 2008 and 2009, there was a change in perception of the global capitalist system, demanding more ethical goals to address by corporates, etc. Morality, ethics played a role. Business schools as well have changed their agenda and included ethical topics in their curriculum, etc., etc. So, and the World Economic Forum, since this is sort of the major platform for global leaders, took this up 2014, in the beginning involuntarily, because as you may know, the global corporates are paying a fortune of money to be a member of the World Economic Forum and the first leagues, but they have as well the freedom to do some side events. And of course, when you're one of the most prestigious world investor like Paul Singer and Daniel Loeb, so his teammate sort of in setting up this event together with Microsoft and others. So of course, when they are saying we are doing this event, other people were coming from major corporates like Accenture, Deutsche Bank, MasterCard, etc., etc. And this changed the conversation in Davos, and made a very strong impact as well in changing the agenda. So the year after, there was then the first kind of official event where the topic of LGBT equality was then addressed. And there was a sort of a mushrooming thing of people showing up for these topics, setting up events which had a connection as well to natural sciences, to as well the trans issue was then brought up on the agenda, etc., etc. This is of course reflects kind of the dramatic change we have seen so far in the corporate world addressing the topic of LGBT+ equality. So excuse me, I was too fast. So so this is the next one here. Just to summarize where we are, I've described a bit the evolving and fast-growing ecosystem in the world around LGBT+ equality, which was fed by the UN, which was also supported by the World Economic Forum, where we have seen a stunning number of new organizations being found, for instance, like the one in South Africa I've mentioned, Open for Business I've mentioned, but so Proud at Work Foundation in Germany, for instance, or another one is REDI in Spain, and East Meets West, which covers a bit Central and Eastern Europe. So that's all pretty new. And of course, that's a major thing. I think I would just briefly go back to this one here. What is interesting here that the World Economic Forum has now, so since 2019 now, there is now the partnership of global LGBT equality, which is a part of the World Economic Forum system, has now started to manage the standards I've said here. So, you know, we see a sort of cooperation, a kind of merging of the World Economic Forum issues with the United Nations on the topic of LGBT equality globally, from a human rights perspective, but also from a business perspective. Of course, that's a major development which we have seen there. So let me go now to the next point, which is drivers, trends, fields of actions. There's a long list, and be relaxed. I don't want to address all these 10 topics. They are very strong drivers. One I've addressed already, which is the ecosystem fed by many players. But let me perhaps say one thing which are very, very crucial, I think, for current developments. One is that while, let's say, some 10 years ago, there was sort of a resistance of businesses to even address the topic of human rights, this now has changed. Of course, there are many corporates who only claim to be interested to take care of human rights, but there is an increasing number and an increasing pressure for them to take care of these. And of course, this is connected very much to this idea of corporate social responsibility. I'm sure that all of you have known this topic already. So there is this CSR topic, responsible business I've put in here, where sort of the business world is connected to the human rights world in some way, where the topic is then sort of matched with the LGBT equality topic. And of course, this is very much connected to this question of social change. This is one major driver we see. So CSR, this is sort of the roof, and there is the business interests, the social change topic, and the LGBT equality and human rights topic. And that's new. This was not there, let's say, 7 or 8 years ago. Then we see, and that's very, very impressive as well, we see a very fast sort of landscape, fast-growing landscape around role models, knowledge, facts, indexes, measuring, discusses, and stories. So my book, for instance, but it's not just my book, as you go into the internet, you see that there's a growing awareness for how important it is to have role models. And there are a lot of organizations now, many of them I've addressed just recently in this, so a couple of minutes ago, in this ecosystem. They have programs in which they feature role models. So for instance, on the role models, so LGBT plus role models on the executive level. LGBT plus role models on in the cohort of the young. So also what is important as well, they have increasingly as well featuring role models and the allies sections. It's not because some years ago, people have come to understand that it's not enough to address in their LGBT plus equality politics and policies around D&I and HR and so forth, to focus on the LGBT community as such only, but to sort of get into a discussion and broaden the focus and get allies into this. So fathers, mothers, those who have friends that are LGBT plus, who are nevertheless interested, who are interested in questions around justice, equality in general. And of course, this cohort has grown dramatically. And this is, of course, one very important thing around the model thing. Knowledge and facts, we still, this I have to say, we still have a shortage in facts and figures, but this is at least gradually changing because there's now more money from the corporate world going into these organizations I've just described. We as well now see at universities, but not just there, so more research out describing, for instance, how many people are there, how many people are there in a society that self-identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, intersexual, queer, asexual, etc. So, and of course, you may imagine that, of course, the cultural setting is important for getting these information because, for instance, in some liberal Western countries in Europe, we have a very high sensitivity around privacy and to share these data, while in other countries, it's more easier to collect data on these topics. So in the Anglo-Saxon countries, it's usually easier to get these facts. And for instance, there's the Williams Institute in the US, which is focusing very much on collecting data to have a basis as well to understand how large is the community of LGBT people, what are their needs, what are their shortcomings, where are the successes as well. And this is only in the beginning, but this has sort of mushroomed as well in awareness, but also the research findings are richer, are becoming richer. So there's a growing as well amount of indexes measuring LGBT equality at work, so in global places. So for instance, Stonewall from Britain has an index for the United Kingdom, but also for the global world. There is the Human Rights Human Rights Foundation in Human Rights Campaign, excuse me, in the US, based in Washington, who's dealing with this topic. That's perhaps one of the most important indexes, which are rating companies on whether they are LGBT friendly and to what extent they are. There is, for instance, as well, these indexes now in Germany. There are indexes as well in other countries. So that's, I've mentioned the one in South Africa. There is a major one, very highly sophisticated one in the Netherlands. There's the one as well in Italy, where you have an organization which is called Parks. So, this, all the things around models, knowledge, facts, indexes, measuring to get an insight on what is really out there in terms of LGBT equality specifically, has grown during the last years dramatically. And this, of course, is very much connected as well that you see in the social media, but not just there. And my story as well, addressing this topic, stories. And of course, we all know that so just having data is not enough. You have to have a narrative and to tell story. And these stories are then connected to facts and to models, role models. And this is also growing, and I'm going on to the next slide. I think that's another one I wanted to briefly look at because I want to as well raise your awareness for this, that we are now talking increasingly about not about shareholder value capitalism, but mostly there's now a strong tendency as well to talk about stakeholder capitalism. So what does this mean? So it does mean that, and of course that's relevant for this topic here, I'm talking about, what does this mean? It does mean that until, let's say, some 10 years ago, approximately, until the financial crisis, there was a strong focus of business to address most of their attention to increasing profits and shareholder profits, so shareholder gains and profits. So, of course, that's understandable from a historic point of view, because there was a strong influence by thinkers like Milton Friedman. Some of you may know him, and others. But this has changed because the skepticism around sort of the responsibilities of companies has grown after the financial crisis, because especially the financial players, but also other companies which have been bought out by governments because they had problems and then were too big to fail, and then taxpayers' money had to get into this gap and was filled to save these companies, including banks, of course. Some of you may recall this or know this. There was this changing discourse around when we are talking about responsibility. And I had this topic already around responsibility, but in a more broader sense, it's really something which is as well loading the whole development around LGBT equality, is that companies are not just responsible for those who are giving the monies, so the investors, so the shareholders, but it's about as well for that they are responsible vis-a-vis their employees, the customers, the suppliers, the whole value chain, the media. So they have to take the interest of all these partners into their consideration and their function, if you want. Also, that's interesting because they also has a growing tendency as well to work together with NGOs and civil society organizations and to engage even with opponents. And you see very strongly this movement towards stakeholder capitalism, because in the connection of talking about pushing forward sustainability in the corporate world. So this is definitely something which is also as a movement pushing for more LGBT equality around the world. So let me stop here for a second. So Paul, would you like to share the results? Okay, here, so we see the results of the questions, the polls. So let me just briefly go into this before I'm coming to the last final part of my presentation. So, so do you know the LGBTI standards of conduct for business? So yes said only 4% and no said 96%. So I'm happy that you learned a bit about the LGBTI United Nations standards of conduct for business. That's a major thing I said. So I really recommend to you to go to the PGLE website. We see more information, or reach out to me, because that's a major thing which drives the movement around LGBT equality. There's another question I've asked. So how many people in any society do you think belong to the LGBT plus community? So about 2.5% of you, the audience, said 13%. About 7.5%, 50% was saying this. And about 20% belonging to the LGBT plus community was saying 38%. That's interesting because many people don't know at all. Some people have a rule of thumb, say between 5 and 10, which would then match approximately with 7.5%. And in fact, that's what, there is no sort of real data about this out, but there's some metadata, and across all over the world gave a sort of an approximation, at least until recently, that's about 70.5% in any society. Some say 5, some say 6, some say 8, so it's about 75%. So the 50% will make this point here. are not far from reality in that sense. But what I want to make a point here is that there are now recent studies which show that through the rise of the sensitivity around non-binary identities, for instance, or intersexual people, or people who self-identify as queer, whatever then this means specifically, or as asexual, or as pansexual, or as omnisexual, that there has been a dramatic change across the generation. So the younger generations, I assume most of you in this webinar are below, let's say, 25 or below 30. And of your generation is a lot more into belonging to or self-identifying to an organization, to self-identify to a sexual orientation or gender identity, which is not the majority. So the majority is heterosexuality, means sexual orientation, heterosexual, and belonging to what is called cisgender. So, but there's now research out as well with respect to the yes, for instance, which says about 20% of the younger ones self-identify as not belonging to the mainstream sexual orientation or gender identity, which of course is a lot. And what this research also shows that there is a strong change. So the younger generation have this tendency, at least in the US, and there are similar movements in other, at least liberal Western countries, and also in other countries. But this is less so the older the people are. So let's say those who are 40 plus, you're coming closer to the 70.5%. And if you're getting to the 60 or 70-year-old people, there's even less. So the younger the people, the more they self-identify as sort of not belonging to the heterosexual majority or to the majority of gender identities. So that's a very interesting development. You may not be surprised, and many of you may not be surprised if you go as well along what you see in the social media and in the media, because of course the representation of LGBT people, not in all countries, of course not, but in a significant number of countries has increased dramatically and shows more LGBT plus people on the screen. So I'm coming to the last question. So what are the economic costs of LGBT plus representation in expressed in loss of GDP? That's interesting what you have put in here. So first possible answer was 1.5%, and about 1/3 of your votes were saying that's what you think. Then no loss at all was saying 8%, and about 5%, so the middle range, was saying 63%. So well, that's also interesting. So this very huge divergence here, because it really depends. So there's research out now, for instance, by Open for Business, so this institution I've mentioned already, which says, for instance, that you have for the English Caribbean states a loss of GDP between 2.5, the English-speaking Caribbean state, between 2.1 and 5.7%. You have as well sort of research for others, let's say Uzbekistan or Poland or Hungary, and depending where you are, it's between 1% and even more than these 5% I'm mentioning here. So it really depends. And what is, for instance, take another country, which is India. So there was a major research study out by Lee Batchett, 2014. It was 1.4%, attributing to this loss of 1.4% of GDP, attributed this to more healthcare costs, which of course are understandable because, of course, there is more psychological costs for the system. There is underutilized human resources, there is a loss of tourist dollars, etc. So thank you so much for participating here. So I'm coming to the last point. I think we have another 4 to 5 minutes until we are getting to some question session. So third point is ways to take action and ensure LGBT equality at work. So this topic addresses, and I'm trying to be sure here, and perhaps you can enter into discussion in this if you want. So what can companies actually, so what are companies actually doing in ensuring LGBT plus equality at work? And what are they doing? So of course, there's a broad range. And of course, we have as well different kinds of strategies. And of course, we have as well the phenomena of pinkwashing. So then companies now pretending to be LGBT plus friendly in some countries. Of course, they don't do in China or in Bangladesh or in, I don't know, Kyrgyzstan. So where you have a very hostile climate for LGBT plus people, but let's say for those countries where you would expect a different climate, like the US, for instance, at least some part of the US, Canada, for instance, or Germany, or France, or Italy, or the Netherlands, but also some parts in some other parts in Europe and or in Asia, for instance. So what are they doing? So usually one thing is there is somebody from the C-level speaking up to change the conversation. So in the past, they may have not done anything, but in order to change something, it's very crucial that the employees in the company realize something has changed, and this is supported from the top. So you need the support from the top and visibly in speeches, in the intranet, but also, of course, in the activities beyond the corporate walls. So, for instance, supporting NGOs dealing with LGBT plus equality, or participating in LGBT equality indexes, or supporting employees that are working for, let's say, a company which is based in, let's say, the US, but then is sent to India or to Saudi Arabia. To what extent are they able to and willing to protect these people? Or in Russia, I've been to Russia as well, of course, that's a different thing there. Telling a story as well about Russia in my book. So it really depends. So top level support is important. A strategy is important, of course. Then what is important very often as a first step as well to create an LGBT plus employee network, ERG it's called, employee research group. Very often companies are calling this. And give them a budget and empower them, make them visible. Also being visible through role models of these members of this network. Also initiating and promoting that allies are active in these LGBT plus networks. For instance, when I was giving a presentation, I was invited to a major technology conference of SAP. So I was invited by the Women's Network to give a presentation of my book. So there was a sort of intersectional approach and allyship approach, and understanding that's not enough that sort of the gender issue is addressed in one box of the company, while the LGBT plus equality issue is addressed in another box. So there's sort of a growing pressure as well, and a growing necessity to think these things together and to work for these things holistically. So there's a long list, which you can as well find in my book, and you can as well ask for me. And I think we are running out of time now. Perhaps I'm doing a last point here, ways to take action, ensure LGBT equality at work. Again, I want to take up this thing of pinkwashing, so that people own, so the companies or other organizations only pretend that they are LGBT plus friendly. when I'm asked, what do you think about pinkwashing companies, say, well, that's a good sign, which is perhaps a bit paradoxically, but what I think is some 10 years ago, we didn't even use or didn't know this term of pinkwashing. So that there is now a complaint that companies are pinkwashing in certain areas of the world. As I said, of course, not in China or in Arabic states, but in other parts of the world, that they are taking steps to position themselves as LGBT friendly is a good sign. Why? Because they know they have to do this to attract talent, because they know they have sensed it's important that so the customers are are more aware and putting more importance as well on companies to show to position them as LGBT plus friendly. As well, investors are more sensitive to these issues because they know, they've learned, that's what research is showing, that a corporate culture which is open and welcoming to everybody, independent of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender, race, ethnicity, age, or whatever. So such a working culture and corporate culture managed smartly is better for the economic outcome of a company. It's better as well for innovation, because more perspectives are brought in, for growth, for profits. And of course, at the same time, it's not only good for business, but it's also good for human rights and ethical things, which are more important for the younger generation. So I think this is why I'm going to stop now.
Excellent, thank you, Jens. Obviously, thank you for presenting today. It's been fantastic to hear from you, and obviously some really great takeaways, and obviously some very insightful points which you made throughout the presentation. So we're going to go to a short Q&A section with the audience. Obviously, just before we do, just to remind everyone that if you do have any questions, please type these into the Q&A feature or either the chat, and obviously we'll try and get through all the questions. And if we do run out of time, don't worry, these will get passed on to Jens to follow up with you following the webinar. Also, just to let you know, today's session has been recorded, so you will receive a copy of the recording a week from today. So there'll be an email sent to you which will have the exclusive link, and obviously you can watch the webinar back again. So we'll go to the Q&A section. So we've had some questions come in, Jen. So I think it'd be quite nice to start off. We've had a question around obviously someone wanting to make change in their organization. So the question is, what advice would you give to someone who wants to be a game changer in their organization they work in?
So of course, the word game changer is a word play, of course. Game changer. So I understand this questions now in the way that it's how this person wants to know this, wants to be a game changer with a Y in there. So I'm making a difference in terms of LGBT equality at work. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is understood that way.
Yes.
So I think that's understood. Okay. So okay, that's a good question. It's a great question because it really depends, of course, on the state of your company or your organization. So let's imagine, for instance, a company like Accenture or SAP. So they are very much, or McKinsey or BCG or Freshfields, to mention a law firm as well. So those companies are quite mature in terms of allowing or having realized so far a high degree of LGBT plus equality in work, which shows in their policies, regulations, the events they are setting up, the communications from the top and from the bottom. So having ERGs, et cetera, et cetera. So of course, to be a game changer there is different than to be a game changer organization where you have a quite low level. And I now take this challenge on and assume that you, whoever has asked this question, are in an organization which has a low level of LGBT friendliness? Well, so the first thing I think you do is form alliance behind the stage. So you have to gather, of course, people of whom you think have same sort of mindset as you have and who want to change something. But also, and I'm talking about some examples in my book as well, sometimes as well, you have to take the risk and to expose yourself. What I mean is, of course, it's the first scenario is, of course, you're in a small group. You say, well, for instance, we want to, you go to your HR department, or you go to a major guy in your organization of whom you think who has an impact. We say, we want to form an LGBT plus employee network. These are companies in our industry or other industries who have these networks. These are the advantages, for instance, talent acquisition arguments, cultural arguments, economic arguments in the sense I've described, etc., etc. So make a list of arguments. So economic arguments, and then say, so this is how we want to start, and then think about, for instance, how can you set up your first event? For instance, I was invited in 2017 by Allianz Global Investors. So Allianz Global Investors is one of the major 20 top 25, 20 top investing companies. And so they wanted to launch their sort of ERG and wanted to present what they have in mind, and they invited the CEO. So I was invited there for a presentation and for a discussion, but also on the stage was then the CEO. Of course, to become a game changer sometimes means as well to have to have a bit luck. So it was luck as well for the organization that they could manage that the CEO was on stage. But usually that's not that improbable to be lucky in that sense, because usually people tend to think only in their own bubble, and I strongly recommend to go beyond thinking beyond the LGBT plus bubble and to form alliances with potential allies. As I was saying, this is a growing importance in the corporate setting. So these are some ideas for, I hope this helps to answer this question.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Jens. So we've had some more questions come in. So I'm going to put this forward to you. So they're saying, we think that you covered it earlier on in the presentation, but they're asking about what are your expectations for the next years in the LGBT community in the economy field?
Well, that's, yeah, so I've covered this a bit, but in fact, I'm already thinking as well to perhaps set up a new book next year or so, early next year. So I think that we are at a watershed moment, actually. And we see, if we look at all at societies globally, not just because of the pandemic, but beyond that, that we have a sort of growing inequalities. Economic-wise, education-wise, health-wise. So I think that we are now at a time of where not just diversity, but inclusion and managing inclusion in a general sense matters more than ever. So for instance, the stakeholder approach I was referring to, so which sort of includes not just the investors' money, but all the interests of all the ones which are working in an organization, so in the corporate world, is a major step for moving forward for the company's world. And I think here is something as well you could do. I mean, everybody could do. If you're interested, not just to be a game changer in the way I've just described, but also acknowledge that you as an individual have a certain power because you are belonging to the younger cohort. I think this is something you can push as well through your activities, for instance, in social media. Because the corporate worlds, they will have a lack of good talent. They already have. This will increase during the next years, and so the power of the young and the changed values compared to the older ones is increasing. So this is definitely something which I would say will determine the future path of LGBT equality also. So yeah, I think I stop here.
Excellent, fantastic. So we've got another question. Obviously, the question is from the audience member. They work in quite a niche sector within the tech industry. So their question is that they are always looking for great talent within the diversity and inclusion, with diversity and inclusion at the forefront of their hiring strategy. But how do they attract more LGBT plus people?
Well, of course, this is a question related to, I would say, acquisition strategy, HR acquisition strategy. But of course it goes, and I'm very, very thankful that this question was put forward, because of course, just to see it only as an HR strategy question is not enough. Because we know if you go to a website and go, for instance, to a job fair or whatever, and you see, well, if you're a member of the LGBT plus community or a member of whatever community, well, for me, it's important how this company deals with the LGBT plus community, because this is a real standard for me, whether they have an open and welcoming corporate culture. Of course, it's one thing that they perhaps position themselves on the website nicely with rainbow colors and these kind buzzwords you always find on these websites and so forth. But I think that's the reason why I would say it's worthwhile then checking out as well these indexes and where companies are positioned at. And that was because this question was coming from the tech industry, I think. Of course, there are companies out that are strong in LGBT plus equality. But for instance, if you include SAP as a tech company, I would say that's legitimate to do this. Or if you include Accenture as at least tech loan and biased company. On the other hand, I have to say that if you look at, for instance, at companies like Google or Facebook or usual suspects or Apple, interestingly, they are not that visible in the discourse around LGBT plus equality, which does not mean that they are not open enough, but it really means that they are perhaps not taking responsibility to the amount that it should be, to the extent that they should be. So I would say, so focusing only at this question only as a HR question is not enough. It really is something to do with the holistic approach to D&I and CSR in general, and how the whole company as such is presenting itself vis-a-vis all the stakeholders I've mentioned before. Sorry, it's a bit complicated. It's not an easy question, but it's also not an easy answer.
No, that's perfect. Excellent. I'm going to put forward one last question because I think it's quite a nice question to obviously finish on. So, so from your research from the book, what organisations did you find were leading the way in diversity and inclusion, and why do you think this is the case? So
may I ask, Paul, is this D&I or is this LGBT D&I?
LGBT.
Okay. Okay, which organizations? So perhaps we should differentiate between, on the one hand, those organizations I've mentioned in the first part of my presentation of the webinar. So for instance, Product Work Foundation in Germany, or RISE in India, or really in Spain, or Stonewall in the UK, or Out Leadership in the US, or Open for Business in the UK. Of course, all these organizations are very important because here you see something which is as well new, something new which has developed during the last 10 years. Of course, the companies that are working in these organizations under the umbrella of these organizations are on the one hand competitors on the job market, on the money market, the investment market, and the customer market, etc., etc. On the other hand, they have understood that it's important to join forces and to move this topic forward. So gather forces, if I say, if you want. So in a way, these organizations are leading the way in some way. If you look at the corporate and at individual companies, I recommend to you basically as well to look at the respective indexes in the respective countries. Why I'm saying this? For instance, if you go to the major index of the Human Rights Campaign in the US, of course, that's a very important one. But if you see there are sometimes companies in there, for instance, EY, an example, and I think they have the highest rating there, but they don't have high ratings in other countries. So it really depends. Typically French companies. I speak French. I've been living many years in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. I'm very much interested in France as well. I'm German, but nevertheless, I've lived in many places. So in France, you see very many companies as well being present in the HR Human Rights Campaign Index, covering mostly the US, although the index is also focusing on what the companies are doing globally. But if you go then to France, many of these companies are not present there because it's the French landscape and moving on with LGBT equality in the workplace is more challenging for cultural reasons than in the US. So, it's a great question, but it really depends on the cultural setting you are in, and you have to watch carefully in which country you're looking, and where the company is active.
Excellent, fantastic. Unfortunately, we seem to be out of time. So just thank you for taking the time to present today. It's been fantastic to have you, and obviously it's been great hearing all your insights. I'm sure the audience have thoroughly enjoyed it as well. Just before we do go, just to remind the audience that a week from today, you will receive an email which will have the link for the recording. So keep a lookout for that email. Our next webinar is taking place on the 23rd of February. That's with Stephen D'Souza, and he'll be presenting on not knowing, leading in uncertainty. So to join that webinar, just head over to our website. You'll be able to fill out the form to register your place. And obviously we'll be in touch nearer the time with obviously the login details. So lastly, thank you again, Jens. It's been great to have you, and we look forward to seeing everyone at a webinar in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you.